Hello Aqua Friends, my name is Nicole and today we are going to do this autumn still life. I'm starting off with some good quality watercolor paper. This is Arches that I have cut in half and I have taped it to my board. I'm going to paint the background of these leaves and we're going to start off wet on wet. I'm using a round brush for this, trying to get into the nooks and crannies around my leaves. I'm going to start off with a very light blue. I have some sky blue color here. I believe it's cobalt blue or horizon blue, I'm sorry. And I'm going to drop that into the wet area that I have on my paper here. I'm not concerned about getting the blue in all the nicks and crannies because the light is kind of coming through the leaves, and if I have some paper white areas, that'll actually benefit me and it'll look like the leaves are really bright and beautiful. I'm also leaving spaces where I'm going to put some out of focus leaves. So picking up some oranges, I'm putting in my out of focus leaves. Some of the colors that I have in my palette are transparent pyrrole orange. I have a bright vermilion orange. I also have quinacridone yellow, cadmium yellow, sap green, green gold are some of the greens that I have in my palette. And I just want everything to be very soft and out of focus. Also, you have to take into consideration that watercolor dries about 25% lighter. Now, before you let your paper dry completely, make sure that you do get the excess water off the sides or you might end up with a bloom. Once that dries completely, I'm going to put my first layer on the leaves themselves. Starting off wet on wet is always a good idea so that you get a nice cohesive color for your background underpainting. There's a teeny bit of green that I see on the side, and that sort of melts into some oranges and reds. And so I am building up those colors slowly. Have my greens, my yellows, and then this is quinacridone red. Going to try to add as much pigment and a little bit of detail as I can before my paper starts drying. So I have put in some of the veins, some of the little jaggedy edges, adding little imperfections here and there. Now moving on to another leaf, I'm going to repeat those steps. So wet it first, drop in your colors from your lightest to your darkest. And I'm also painting in the direction that the veins grow. That'll make it more realistic and it gives the leaf some dimension. So you're going to continue in the same fashion with this first layer on your leaves, hopping from leaf to leaf. So you're letting one area dry and going about doing the other leaves. Now, because this is just the first layer that we're doing on the leaves, notice that it really does kind of blend in with the background. Without another layer of paint, you're just not going to get that depth in your painting. So this is kind of like the ugly stage. It doesn't look like much right now, but you do have to stick with it. Things will drastically turn around when we put a second layer of paint on our leaves and start adding detail. So once my first coat is completely done, you're going to let that whole thing dry, and then we can go about working on the second layer. Now with the second layer, a lot of the time I am just going to go straight for the color. I'm not going to pre-wet it first. So I'm actually working wet on dry, but as I add more color to the leaf, those two colors will bleed together, and in fact you're working wet on wet in certain areas, like with the green I'm doing against the yellow. So you could already tell that leaf is nice and saturated. Definitely it looks a lot more in the foreground, and it's really popping against our background. I'm adding little details, darkening up the areas along the side of the leaf where it's getting crusty. And I'm going to basically do the same with each leaf. So here I go, working wet on dry. Now this is a bigger leaf, and I might need to add some water here just so that I have a chance to get everything in there before it dries and causes blooms, because I definitely don't want that. So I decided the quinacridone red, when it dried, it was a little dull, and I changed to permanent rose is one of the colors that I'm using here on this red leaf. You're working on these second layers and putting in these tiny details. Dropping in some little dots and imperfections makes the leaves look a little more realistic. Of cadmium yellow, painting all of that all over my leaf. And while it's wet, we will drop in some orange down the middle and along the veins. There's also bits of green that I'm going to try to get in there as well. I've switched over to a script liner brush for this, for delicate little areas. This leaf will be worked in the same way as the other yellow leaf I just finished. If you don't want your paint to spread as much, you can wait till it's halfway dry. And when you drop in your colors, they won't spread as much. They'll be a little bit more defined. And that'll just come with practice, knowing when the right time is to add more. So with this red leaf, I'm doing a glaze of some liquid watercolors I have to pop up that saturation. I really wanted a ruby red leaf. Now, once your painting has dried, all your leaves are dry, now's the time we're going to add the stems and the small branch that's on the side of the painting here. So one little trick that I like to do to keep a steady hand, and you can't tell because you're looking from the top down, but I do use my pinky finger at times to guide that brush and use it more like I'm drawing in those lines versus painting, and just taking your time to get those fine lines. So having an anchor with your hand, the side of your hand, a finger on the paper is helpful. We are in the home stretch, guys. I've mixed up a little bit of a thinner mixture to go over some of those main veins that I see in the leaves, making things a little cohesive so that everything is attached to that branch. And that pretty much concludes the still life. You guys can take your paper off, sign your painting. You guys just created a masterpiece. Congratulations. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.